United States Economic Systems Timeline by Isaac Ortiz. Part 1, Colonial Economics. Colonial America was divided into 3 distinct regions, and each region had different environmental and geographical conditions that contributed to the development of different economic systems. The New England region had the poorest soil and shortest growing season of all the regions, which created an economy based on occupations such as shipbuilding, logging, fishing, and whaling. Each of these occupations supported the others, as loggers provided wood for shipbuilders, and shipbuilders provided boats for fishermen and whalers. This system, in which each occupation was dependent on another, led to a sustainable economy in the New England colonies that persisted for many years. Trade with New England was also a large part of the New England economy, but due to the lack of agriculture, other regions produced more raw goods to be traded with England. The middle colonies had better soil quality than New England, and agriculture was a larger part of their economy. The middle colonies are most known for their production of wheat and grains that acted as the foundation of their economic prosperity. These crops were both traded with England and provided for their own community, creating a sustainable economic system. The middle colonies also had the highest number of merchants and artisans. Lastly, the southern colonies were almost completely dependent on agriculture and cash crops due to their superior climate and soil quality. Cash crops, such as tobacco and cotton, were grown in excess to be exported to England. Cash crops created an immense amount of wealth for many planters, but overfarming would eventually worsen the soil quality. The need for a labor source on these plantations made slavery a lucrative business in the southern colonies as well. Part 2, Post-Revolution Economics. Independence from Britain opened up new economic opportunities in the U.S. Most importantly, the U.S. was no longer restricted in its trade. While this would benefit the U.S. many years in the future, it initially caused a depression. When Britain and other countries began pouring manufactured goods into the U.S. for extremely low prices, U.S. merchants could not compete. This caused many to be forced to find new markets or develop new businesses. For example, Southern planters and Philadelphia merchants joined together to begin shipping American tobacco directly to continental European markets. The early stages of westward expansion at this point in history also created new economic trends and ways of life. Following the Revolution, people were able to cross the Appalachian Mountains and establish towns and farms. By 1810, Ohio, Tennessee, and Kentucky had been transformed from wilderness into a region of farms and towns. The people of this region were highly focused on self-sufficiency as a means for living in place of trade and business. This economic system and emphasis on self-sufficiency, however, would change with the introduction of new technologies in the early stages of the Industrial Revolution. Inventions such as the cotton gin, steam engine, and the harnessing of electricity would soon create larger industries in the U.S. and establish the beginning of the modern economy. An important event during this era was the creation of the New York Stock Exchange. The New York Stock Exchange was established in May of 1792. It began with just 5 individual stocks for brokers to sell and investors to buy, but it rapidly grew with the increase in commerce. The stock market was so significant during this era because it coincided with the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution enabled companies to be much more productive, and when these companies were publicly traded on the New York Stock Exchange, it provided the funds to further improve their company and increase their economic power. For the next century, as technology would rapidly improve, the stock market acted as a catalyst for the growth of new and innovative companies by allowing investors to take equity in them. Since its inception, the stock market has provided funds for new companies to impact and revolutionize the world. Part 3, the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution took place in Europe in the 18th century, but it did not spread to the United States until the 1800s in what is known as the Second Industrial Revolution. This American Industrial Revolution has had the most significant long-term impact on the United States economy. It is what led to our modern capitalist society and transformed manufacturing from handcraft into machine production. the textile industry was the first to be majorly affected by the Industrial Revolution. For example, the spinning jenny allowed a machine with many spindles of thread to be spun at one time, drastically increasing the speed at which different types of textiles were produced. The agriculture industry was also revolutionized with new farming techniques and machines that enabled farmers to grow more crops. The overarching theme in almost every industry at the time was that the Industrial Revolution improved production efficiency, made companies more profitable, and led to a demand for jobs in factories. These three factors set the stage for the second half of the century following the Civil War and the Gilded Age. Part 4: The Gilded Age. The economics of the Gilded Age were shaped by the Industrial Revolution. New technologies revolutionized the manufacturing process and created the modern industrial economy. Historians have varying views on this era, with some viewing it as an era of corruption, market manipulation, and monopolies, while other historians view the competition that existed between businesses as a tool that was able to lift people out of poverty and increase standards of living for everyone. Even with these two differing views, all historians agree that the size of businesses expanded dramatically in the second half of the 19th century. Railroads and bulk manufacturers were the largest industries at the time and the first major companies to be traded on the stock market, further increasing their capitalization. These large companies adopted new management techniques, including horizontal and vertical integration. These techniques included buying out competitors and merging with manufacturers who were in the same supply chain. Oftentimes, this led to the formation of monopolies. Part 5: Economics between World War I and World War II. As the U.S. entered World War I, it was thrust out of a recession and into an economic boom. Civilians began taking up manufacturing jobs to provide for the war efforts, drastically decreasing unemployment. The continued economic boom in the U.S. during World War I established it as a global power, and the economy came out the strongest it had ever been. This prosperity increased the popularity of the stock market among U.S. citizens, and the market boomed throughout the 1920s, increasing by almost 400%. Consumerism also became very popular in the 1920s as people had much more free time, and new advertising strategies made people believe they needed all the newest products. The exceptionally prosperous era of the 1920s came to an end on Black Tuesday, when U.S. stocks crashed to the ground. An uneven wealth distribution and lack of insured banks was the main cause of this recession, which the U.S. took over a decade to recover from. The election of Franklin Delano Roosevelt in 1932 brought the promise of a New Deal, or a set of strategies to pull the U.S. out of its recession. Roosevelt created the Works Progress Administration, which was designed to bring people back into the workforce and increase the amount of money in circulation. In the end, however, the real factor that pulled the U.S. out of the Great Depression was World War II. Mobilization for the war stimulated the economy by creating a demand for supplies and manufacturing jobs. Big corporations were required to stop producing consumer goods and directed all their resources toward wartime supplies. During this era, the culture of the U.S. began to emphasize rationing and savings to maintain resources for the war. This would set the stage for another age of prosperity in the years to come. Part 6: The Golden Age of Capitalism. The era following World War II is known as the Golden Age of Capitalism because of America's huge boom in GDP and the drastic change in daily life for most Americans. Businesses transitioned from their wartime manufacturing processes to consumer manufacturing processes, creating various products that Americans were ready to buy. After rationing and buying war bonds throughout World War II, Americans were eager and capable of spending. Consumer spending rose by 22% between 1945 and 1947. Part 7: The Technological Revolution. The 1970s was the start of a digital revolution that the U.S. and many other countries are still in today. The 1970s saw the birth of technologies such as computing and the internet that are the foundations of the biggest companies in the world today. This shift from mechanical technology to digital technology has opened up new markets and created new opportunities for companies. Some of today's biggest companies like Amazon, Apple, and Shopify all utilize digital technology to create their products. The dominance of digital companies in today's economy is transforming the world and leading to much speculation as to what economic trends the future will hold.